episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show with another really fascinating guest helping to create a better tomorrow for so many people. Today we have the opportunity to be joined by Jacob Cooper, who is author of a new book entitled Life After Breath, How a Brush with Fatality Gave Me a Glimpse of Immortality. Jacob holds a Master's of Social Work degree. He's also a licensed clinical social worker, a certified hypnotherapist, specializing in past life regression therapy. He's also a certified Reiki master. And as a psychotherapist, Jacob has been working with individuals, groups, and families, ultimately in managing a variety of emotional barriers, promoting improved wellness, resiliency, and ultimately incorporates mindfulness and various spiritual approaches to focus on the connection between mind, body, and spirit, ultimately teaching individuals how to improve cognitive processing and shift their perspectives in many different ways. Jacob also provides meditation and mindfulness seminars to individuals and groups diagnosed with cancer, also with developmental disabilities and the aging population. Jacob has presented the Edgar Cayce Association for Research and Enlightenment, the International Association of Near-Death Studies, and the various spiritual centers, universities throughout the world, and public libraries. His seminars are ultimately set up to promote healing for those grieving or those who seek to understand the continuity of consciousness beyond the physical body, and ultimately those with all sorts of anxieties associated with fear of end of life and death. Jacob Cooper, thanks for taking the time to come on the show today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Ira, for having me on as an honored guest in your program here today. Thank you.
I'm glad we're taking the time. It's really exciting. This is an extremely interesting topic to us. I'd love if you could just start off. I'd love to hand you the floor for a little bit, just if you could sort of take us back to, what happened to you quite early in life, but take us back to sort of the age of 3 when you were on that slide with, I don't know if it was undiagnosed whooping cough, but a little bit of what transpired many years ago. I think that'd be a great way to start things off.
Yeah, so at 3 years old, September of 1993, I guess I gave my age away a little bit, but, I went to the park with family friends of mine, who, was also my babysitter. And I, like any other day, I went to the park and I climbed up a ladder, going onto a slide. And with each rung that I was climbing on, my breathing became a lot more difficult and resuscitated. And then, at the top of the ladder on the slide, I began to suffocate and I lost all forms of oxygen and breathing, and nothing was coming, nothing was going in. And, after that, due to suffocation and deprivation of oxygen, every part of my body began to really just shut down, and I had no control and functionality of any part of my body. And then, due to the deprivation of oxygen, the last thing I remembered, within my body in terms of, being in that moment or being aware of it, was my brain that literally shut down or just snapped in half due to the deprivation of oxygen. I heard a large crack in my brain. It was just an incredibly loud sound, as if you could hear a bone break or something like that. And then once my brain cracked in half, so to speak, or there's a crack within my brain, that's when God and the other side really came in full front, where I had a direct experience with my own spiritual guides. There was a male and female spiritual guide. I had connectivity with my soul family members who greeted me on the other side. I was aware of past lifetimes that I've lived, as well as awareness of countless angels that were literally right in front of me, when my body was just on the ground, lifeless, irresponsive to people's calls. And became aware of what I refer to as Christ consciousness, and as well as a God awareness too, and domain of God, or the palace of light, that I was aware of. And so it was a lot more of a keen awareness to different things that I wasn't influenced or educated by. I grew up Jewish Orthodox, so it's more of a religious upbringing. So all these entities, although mysticism is rooted within religion. Religion sometimes doesn't necessarily highlight that or speak about that, regularly. So there was a full-blown, experience on the other side with many mystical beings. And it was just like a grand reunion with things that I had inside of me that I was amnesiac about or that I forgot about. So there was a lot within that experience.
And when we've discussed near-death experiences with different folks on the show in the past, typically they're not young like you were. Typically, these are people that were in surgery or an automobile accident and so forth. Just thinking back to it, when you, at the time, you were 3. As you've gotten older, how did that sort of, when did you sort of get the insight? Was it all at the time that this happened, or was it sort of over time as you grew up and you began to, you moved beyond sort of the 3-year-old understanding of what you saw? Because so many things I think back about, to my childhood, it's like, wow, I don't know, it wasn't near-death experience, but I was joking with my son the other day about how, back in the day, if you took a little too much cough syrup, we didn't know about it, but you might see stuff in the room that wasn't there. Now we know that sort of cough syrup isn't, always say that's why it's kept behind the counter now at the pharmacy and all that. Have you become more aware as you've thought back to that experience at the age of 3 of what was going on? Or at the age of 3, did you realize, wow, these are angels and God and my great grandparents? Talk a little bit about how that perspective has changed as you've gotten older, as you think back on this experience.
That's a wonderful question. I really thank you for that. Because part of this, my job is, I had this experience, but the real work is to not be defined by the story, but to learn how to define it, so that other people could relate to it. Because this experience, like you said, near-death experiences in general, they're becoming a lot more mainstream, but, general public, from not having that experience, if they're not a part of the 5 to 10% of the population, have still a difficult time understanding that consciousness is not produced by the body. It just rather goes through it. I would say none of us are chronological ages, if that makes sense. This experience didn't happen to my physical instrument, ethereal body. On the surface of just this small page and chapter that I was reincarnated as 3-year-old Jake, but rather it happened to my ageless and timeless soul. And so this experience was on a deep level, kind of penetrating my core. And I think ultimately there's 2 parts of us. There's an external part to the world where the body and soul kind of catch up with each other. So the guitar player and the guitar work in harmony, and we're able to kind of reflect our own, inner nature within this world on an external level. But then there's a whole inner processing that is very much present from, beyond this body and, beyond this time. And so, when we're in the womb, we still have our soul, that you can't take that away from us. It's always there. And so that inner sacred eternal observer is what I would say was the being that experienced this, and, myself. Now, all these terms and lexicons and verbiage, I can't deny that I was greatly assisted by a book that I picked up, and I speak about this in Life After Breath. It's called Embraced by the Light by Betty Eadie, which was a New York Times bestseller. And so reading Betty's book gave me a verbiage and a lexicon to what this kind of thing was. I didn't have a terminology of it. It's just this great experience that I really bogged down, as almost a survival mechanism. I really kept it very much close to my chest. I told no one. And so Betty's experience gave me a lexicon and a universality to define it, but, to other people. But I had my own definitions internally that didn't necessarily have words. It was just more of a general feeling and sensation. So the words to really express it within this reality was assisted, through Betty. But the actual changes of events and things that happened didn't shift. It's just my ability to articulate it, obviously evolved as I was given some of the language, for the near-death experience. If that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. And continuing along that, one of the things that we talked a little bit about in the past, in some ways related to these types of events, and we'll get into that in a bit, but also other things that we do or accept more as children or have a more open mind to. Were there any, once again, as you were 3, were there any interesting conversations, let's say, at the time with, yeah, I don't know who, you were hanging out with on the swings, like, the next week or whatever, but obviously, I have a near-death experience. I'm going to be talking to whomever. There might be kind of like question, but did you discuss it with other children at the time, whether it was when you were 3 or 4 or 5, that, wow, that group, that sort of peer circle was interested, was, more open to hearing the concept versus what an older person, an adult that might have a similar experience, and then, in today's world, whatever, might experience?
I'd speak about this in Life After Breath. I really pushed it away. I mean, the moment that I woke up on the bed with my mother there, intuitively, I just knew that at the time, words were just so limiting. And many near-death experiencers will discuss that what you have is just so out of this world that I didn't necessarily bother to give it to. It's just something so special and so sacred that, words were just, they felt just so futile. So I really kept it, to myself, and I was careful with anyone that I told it to. I really bogged it down. But there's one experience in a way, that I speak about this in Life After Breath, where I was in a classroom and I was having a lot of interdimensional communications with spirits and loved ones and stuff like that. And I turned to a classmate and I just asked point blank, and I recall this, if the person was able to see that, and they just gave me this craziest look. And that was, the suffocation to my body was just the beginning of it for a while. It felt like, in a way, the world outside of me, due to just being blind to this stuff and not having no one to turn and just having to really hold it to myself, was even probably more suffocating. And it was just so painful that, and isolating, that I just buried this. And really, in order to survive in this world, I had to push that kind of stuff away, because and I speak about this in Life After Breath, I was just more comfortable living in that world than this world. And in order to survive this culture that valued the intellect and valued regurgitation of information over the embodiment of who we are, was a juxtaposition that I either had to have radical acceptance to or have opposition to. And eventually, I had to bog that stuff down to survive. And later in life, I could no longer do that. The beach ball had to eventually come up, and to thrive, I had to take ownership and empowerment of that experience to be true to my life and myself. I couldn't go on any longer without living it, the truth.
Understood. So, as you know, several episodes ago, we had Bruce Grayson on talking about his book and his career, in particular the near-death experience area. Down at University of Virginia, he works with Jim Tucker's group, who primarily focus on, these extremely young children that somehow know things about past lives and people that there's no possible way they ever met. Talk a little bit about what past life regression is. Obviously, you are a licensed social worker, obviously can't use drugs and things like that, but what are some of the different techniques in terms of the meditation and some of the other tools that you use also to generate this particular sort of mental state?
Yeah. I was formally trained in the only New York accredited hypnosis school. We're actually able to get continuing educational hours as a certified hypnotherapist. This is through the National Guild of Hypnotists. But then I took a specialized training within past life regression. And so I have a formal training, but what's interesting is I look at my near-death experience as the ultimate framework where I have a lot of my education from. And so I think that's a basic framework, the hypnosis training, but I use a lot of different factors that I had from my near-death experience to try to give over to other people. Essentially, my principle is, from my experience and having this direct experience is that the brain is just merely a filter between the two worlds. And
Sure.
once my brain wasn't functioning properly was when the filter was clearly opened, and the doorway to eternity was opened, and I was able to have that kind of filtered in my consciousness. And so I truly think the brain is a big ally. It could be a big ally or something that really causes us to really block a lot of infinite wisdom, grace, and intelligence that we could have within our life, so we could flow a little bit better. And so with hypnosis, and we talk about deepened state of hypnosis, it really goes to the deepened part of the brain, right? When we're, you talk about the alpha, beta, theta, and delta kind of stages and stuff like that. So, within my hypnotic sessions, it will feel like kind of like a guided meditation, right? Well, the pre-hypnotic inductions, we get people into heightened, relaxed state and stuff like that. But I do implement a lot of what I experience on the other side within my hypnotic scripts that I have with my own individual clients. And so really what it is I see it as really clearing the brain to get into those deeper gears of awareness so that the filter's a lot clearer, so that we could be in the framework of past lives and be in the storehouse of the subconscious mind a little bit easier, which, has some cobwebs and stuff like that if we don't use it enough within the waking state. And so I view that as a muscle. The more we work the subconscious mind, the more the subconscious could reflect itself in the conscious mind, and they could have parallel communication with one another. So if that makes sense, I don't know.
I'm following you. I'm also thinking about let's say the central nervous system part of this, because another sort of, obviously not human related, but we spend a lot of time on talking to folks that are studying all sorts of species that whose brains you can get rid of, and they grow back and they somehow know stuff. We spent some time with Dave Glanzman at UCLA on, he's a big proponent of the fact that, memories and thoughts and ideas can be stored elsewhere beyond the nerve. There's a lot of sort of organisms that don't have brains on this planet. Any interesting things with massage and some of the other tools, obviously, because we talk about cellular memories nowadays, DNA memories at level of DNA, anything you're doing on sort of more of the physical front beyond sort of just the hypnotic component of this?
Yes, I, like you said before in the intro, I do a great deal of Reiki healing as well as mindfulness sessions.
Okay.
The impetus behind writing Life After Breath, and the reason for the particular time of it was the intense parallels between that upper respiratory, highly contagious virus and suffocating, and the direct and indirect implications that people are having, in today's world. And the parallels were just so undeniable. And so my goal is, when I felt lifeless, when I felt out of breath, I wanted to infuse that and give that back to other people, in, as much as I can, so that they could kind of be like solar beings, where they're not doing it all on their own, and they're able to really accept and learn how to channel kind of higher wisdom and strength and guidance through them. And they don't have to be Mr. and Mrs. Atlas all the time in the face of challenges, and they could have a stronger foundation, much greater than the one that they were potentially having from a greater sense of principles. But within my near-death experience, encountering the angels and seeing them as just, kind of like they were just pure servants of God and pure servants of the light. They had no motives or kind of like individuation or identity. They were just pure servants of light, and they were there to just give that to humanity and the world and the situation that I was in. And so I certainly view this lifetime as a school, and past life regression is a great tool and modality to understand our greater purposes, so that messages are repeated, so that lessons are no longer needed to be embraced. But embodying those angels that I saw and being able to then channel that within my sessions is something that I do. But mindfulness, and meditation in particular, is a terrific way to really bring flow readiness. I look at meditation, or mindfulness, as a deepened rapport with eternity. And so a lot of people who meditate, I think what I say is, you don't have to die to really have a sense or understanding of eternity. When you meditate, there's a part of you that you connect to that undeniably become aware that can never be destroyed, that can never be taken from you. And that's kind of like a deepened connection with the soul or the sacred eternal observer. And so I try to do that with my clients so that they don't put myself on the pedestal, but they're able to own their own eternity and connectivity to higher consciousness through, whether that be a Reiki session, a meditation session, it's different paths up the mountain, but a similar expansive understanding of the nature of reality.
And so you work with a variety of different types of patients or clients. You work with people that have been diagnosed with cancer. You work with older people. Could you talk a little bit about how, obviously, here you're dealing with end of life fear of death. Talk a little bit of how sort of the fear differs amongst some of these groups. Obviously, somebody that's had a long life versus somebody that's diagnosed with breast cancer in their 30s, things of this nature. Talk about sort of the different types of folks that you see, and then sort of how that varies in terms of what types of therapies you offer them in terms of the mindfulness, the resilience training, and so forth.
Yeah. How we view ourselves and how we view God is an ultimate informant and influential component with how we view the nature of reality. So I think people who oftentimes view themselves as synonymous with the physical body, I can understand where they come from, where there's a great fear of just this blank kind of emptiness and just putting yourself in a casket and then that's it. Obviously when you see yourself as a physical body, I can fully understand the heightened degree of anxiety of leaving the body and just being in this abyss of nothingness. But I find that people are very, at times in tune with their soul. It's not that, I think dying even scares me. I mean, that process was scary. I mean, suffocating was scary, but the actual process of death is, almost kind of like a lot of times that people almost look forward to, or they don't have as much fear because if they have identification with a part of themselves that's non-tangibilized. And so I think as people evolve with their ability to have deeper connections with their souls and a deep part of themselves, the more that they could really engage with, in different ways with the impermanence of the body. But I also think what's good is being able to confront the finite reality. I think that's good. I think in a way that leads to us leaving nothing in the tank. I think many times we'll say we'll have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, we'll leave it to tomorrow. And as we are seeing in this year, if that hasn't taught us anything, that, we don't have control over time. At any moment that could be taken. And I certainly learned that at the age of 3 years old. I mean, who would have thought, like an innocent day at the playground, even though I speak about this in my book, there was some subliminal understandings that something profound was going to happen. But on paper, a 3-year-old going to a park, we would have known that would have come. And so impermanence, we could deal with great fear, or we could deal with that with great purpose, to really be mindful, be present, and to maximize, this lifetime, and to have a greater extent of value systems that goes beyond moment to moment kind of stuff that in the long scheme of things really does not matter. And so I think people are able to have a lot more of a stable, meaningful existence when they're able to confront the finite part of the body, and they're really able to bring in an infinite part of themselves, and with infinite implications more so.
Yeah, this is a very interesting component of how these types of experiences, and we talked about this a little bit before, can either, in some cases they can be terrifying to some, but other cases they can knock somebody straight and really give them purpose in their life. So it's a very,
It makes total logical sense as to why that would fear us. We're, obviously society where, geez, if we are moving down the block, a lot of people get anxiety. I mean, change brings up a lot of anxiety. Now you think of a total change of everything that you've known yourself, and just the uncertainty of the breach potentially of that, and not having that, in the body and all that we've identified with. I could fully understand logically where people come from in their, and that being one of the greatest questions and fears, since we walked the earth. So.
I mean, do you think, I mean, I know in certain Eastern cultures, death is something that you spend a lot of time meditating on. And it's a major focus, and in a positive way. And you think in the sort of the West, we've sort of pushed it away. We've tucked it away a little too much in terms of our fears that we need to, we need to meditate maybe a little bit more on the concept of death in the West, as they do in some
Yeah.
Eastern cultures.
Well, it's Eastern, and also I look at the king of this almost as ancient Egyptian cultures, where
Okay.
every moment was a build up to facing, death in the afterlife. And so, I think certainly it's something that, especially in today's world where it's like a minute to minute kind of society, and we're very short sighted. I think it's good to have a broader picture,
Yeah.
and to not be so short-sighted. And I think that would allow us to really be filled with a lot more purpose that goes beyond, temporary kind of checking off each boxes in front of us and being very short-sighted. I think that's a good way to live, and it leads to a greater impact. I think if we're just trying to support the body, I see ourselves as vegetables. I think if we're able to see ourselves as an expansive soul, we want to create more impact, and we think a lot more on broader terms versus very short-sighted.
Um, I have a couple of things here. Just love to get your thoughts on. Obviously, last couple of years, there's been a lot of activity or sort of a resurgence, let's say, in the area of psychedelics. Any interesting, in your opinion, based on sort of the work you do, any interesting applications of these types of substances in either past life regression or in some of this mindfulness stuff, as it pertains to sort of fears, end of life, things of this nature? Or do you not think that
Yeah,
there's?
I mean, what's great about Netflix and the internet today is so much of this stuff is being mainstream. I think part of the issue in my early stages was that there was a cumulative disadvantage to people understanding this stuff. I mean, this stuff goes back years and years, but people who just come from generations or communities that are open to this stuff, that they have time on their hands, whatever, they're able to open up their mind. Whereas other people who are just trying to just, tread water, they don't have much time to kind of think about all these deeper things as much. And so I think now that it's a lot more accessible and put in front of ourselves, I think people are really expanding, different modalities, different practices, different interests. And I think we're able to speed things up by slowing things down in a way. I think by speeding things up, we're able to really evolve quicker, grow quicker, and expand quicker, and change quicker as we're privy to a lot of these more kind of tools at hand. Psychedelics, obviously, you think of, so many different, Terrence McKenna and Timothy
Sure.
Leary, stuff like that. And that was a big movement long before now, but it's obviously having a resurgence as to all of these things today. This stuff is never new. It goes far beyond all those figures, stuff like that. But I personally don't practice it, let's just say. I think people obviously need to use their own judgment.
Sure.
I think there's a great documentary actually on Netflix where this person was just on its last rope. They've tried everything from psychotherapy to you name it, they tried, and they're still just suicidal and depressed. And on the last stop on the train, they tried, I guess it was like DMT or something like that, or, ayahuasca or something like that, and it changed their life. And so I can't speak for every person. That would be irresponsible. I think it's subjective to each person. I would say, like anything else, is to be careful where you put your own vulnerability to, and be careful with where you put your own life to. Because I mean, obviously, you wouldn't just go to any random doctor with the foot problem, and if the doctor wasn't licensed or whatever, and they say, I'm going to perform surgery on you, you'd be quite cautious. And so I think people really need to obviously do their homework. But I see it as a double-edged sword. There's a risk, obviously, if you're with the wrong person or if it has a reaction. But there's also a risk with walking across the street this morning. I mean, so there's a lot of potentiality of these modalities. I personally, I didn't necessarily experience it myself, but I tried kind of like a Native American, almost kind of a shamanic kind of thing
Mm-hmm.
within Sedona. It's called Repe or something like that, where they just, take a straw and they just blow the stuff in your nose, and it's like an old Native American kind of
Yeah.
thing. And yeah, I mean, at first, my eyes were just very watery, and it just felt like a big hit. But after I felt quite relieved. And so what I would say is for people interested is to try, and Reiki is just a very lower end kind of thing. It's not like you're knocked out for a week or two,
Mm-hmm.
have to take off from work. So, I think smaller stuff I'm not opposed to, but I can't speak for everyone. Everyone's got
Sure.
different experiences.
Sure. One other thing I always want to ask you about, because it's just very interesting to me personally, but dreaming. It's another area that's a lot of being worked on in different corners in terms of either precognition or, I had the opportunity to talk to Chris Kerr, excuse me, last year. He works on end-of-life dreaming and these bizarre phenomena of when, everything's ultimately breaking down. Many of these end-of-life dreams, like the near-death experiences, get a lot more clear. Any interesting connection to some of your work with regard to dreaming and sort of the, let's say, the teaching component, whether it has to do with meeting people in dreams that we've never met or learning about things from the past? Any interesting dreaming-related stuff that you want to talk about?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's obviously, like you said, with the end of life stuff, there's a lot of lucid, visions and, all that stuff. And, it's interesting because I'm finding with a lot of, family members and, some people that I worked with in hospice, I'm finding at times a similar phenomenon where they'll speak about their loved one on their last days and they'll feel like arms reaching out, or they'll be able to have a clear conversation by looking out the window and just talking to the deceased relative. And these were experiences that they never had, or even talking different languages that they, haven't spoken since they've been a child. And it's just amazing what happens on these, kind of end of the body, end of life, so to speak, kind of situations. And I know, for instance, I speak about this in Life After Breath. My aunt was one of my spiritual mentors, and she was on her deathbed, and she had a lot of these premonitions and heightened intuitions, and she said, I keep on hearing the word pictures, with you, and I want to tell you the word picture because when you look at a picture, you're able to look at a soul family member, you're able to see a clear, undeniable connection with each member of that family. And at the time, I'm like, that's pretty cool, kind of things. And then she passed away. And then actually the person who gave her the reading passed away a couple of days ago, but the person who picked up on her, she was a friend of mine, her name is Sandy, not a friend of mine, but later became one. She passed away a couple of days ago, but she said, I'm connecting to your aunt, why she keep on telling me the word pictures, pictures, pictures. And so that was the validation of the soul family messages that she was trying to have.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding dreams, there's so many different levels, but obviously when people are about to go, I really do believe their consciousness expands, and they're just kind of like in this incubational period where they have a lot more heightened awareness, and they're a lot more open. And I view that as something very resourceful, because I think for people in a way to have these kind of understandings, it takes away a lot of fear oftentimes if people are open to it. And I think that's why the veils are gossamer thin. It's almost kind of like an ease of transition for people to get into the deeper waters of their eternal nature, and just the beginning of it. But dreams, yes, I mean, that is the language of the subconscious mind and the soul. And I think once we let go of our body, we could have, spirit. I have clients who have spirit communication with their loved ones through dreams. And, they go to a similar place at night and they have that. And so it's just interesting what happens when we open up the parachute of the mind and how information comes to us regularly. When we let go of it, it opens up clearly. So.
Absolutely. Jacob, any final messages for the audience? I mean, you have obviously you're doing so much, but messages in terms of from a 2021 perspective, in terms of resilience, in terms of looking forward to a better year, a better few years. Please take us out, however you wish.
Yeah, I like we were talking about earlier. I think my experience was not to be something that I just held on to. It wasn't a story that I was just here to rattle off, the narrative of it, but rather my experience, what I learned was I was able to really give it over to other people in the best possible way that I can. And that's the implications of the lessons that I had and the wisdom of the other side, so that we don't have to wait until we die to experience those foundations of wisdoms and understanding of eternity, and trying to bring the hereafter to the here and now. And so I try to encourage people to, to be their true essence. And I think so many times we get defined by things, but we don't define our own, narrative. And whether that's literal or allegorical, I think really it's living your best version of yourself and finding ways to integrate and make sense of your own life, and to examine it and to find ways to not hold on to it, but to be free and unencumbered, to pass it over to those that might benefit from it. From my experience in reading Betty's book, I didn't, I thought it was this cool experience, but I buried it down like an old book that I was collecting dust, and it was just kind of sitting there on the shelf. It wasn't until I recognized that this could be something that could benefit people, that people could really, enhance their lives from, that it took value. And so I think so many times we just validate stuff within our side of ourselves, and we just pathologize it, or we just kind of dim down the light of it. And I think ultimately, people will say one thing or another, but if we plant a seed, we could be amazed by what could happen out of ourselves and out of the story. And so I think for people, you don't have to wait until, you die to tell your story. And just because, you don't have like a big crazy following or social media things does not mean you could change someone's life or make an impact. Doesn't mean that that person is better or superior, because on the other side, the one thing I learned is that there's windows without walls. It's all clear connectivity. There's no barriers. There's no hierarchical structures. It's all uniformal, kind of oneness. And I think, ultimately we're here to not just take and feed the body, but rather have a ripple effect from the essence of our nature. And I think ultimately we want to leave this world with a ripple effect behind us. And I know you do that. And so many listeners here, I'm sure, are able to do that. And I think that's it. And to understand, obviously, that in the face of impermanent reality, not being afraid to look at it, just as we look at the dark night of the sky, we're able to see the stars, and we're able to see the light shining. And so I think within dark moments, I think it's important to not away from that, but to look at it head on and to embrace it, and to be able to allow that to be able to see a different perspective that we might not have had we been comfortable sunbathing, before. So if you look at any teacher, whether that's Eckhart Tolle or Neil Donald Walsh, I happen to share the same agent as them. They have this dark night of the soul period, but from just losing everything, they're able to gain everything, And so from losing that identity, from losing, all the comforts, they were able to get everything. That doesn't mean you have to go on welfare or, be homeless to be enlightened, but that means is to embrace the art of letting go and open to yourself up to a new reality, that you can no longer look at life with the same pair of eyes. And so embrace change, embrace evolution, embrace not doing this all on your own, embrace all this stuff around you, and embrace what's inside of you is infinitely greater than what's in front of you. And that's what I learned in my near-death experience, that through moments of suffocation, through moments of being lifeless and breathless, that, in those intense moments, I was reminded that we can never be hurt nor damaged, only temporary kind of bothered in a way, or just having like a shake-up moment of period, but there's an infinite eternity within ourselves that can never be taken from us, no matter what happens in the impermanent body. So hope that makes sense, and hope that resonates.
It's a wonderful message, and it's a message we need more of in today's world, as you were saying, with everything we have going on. To come back to these basic ideas and look beyond all this stuff that's been obscured in front of us, as you were saying, with the with the likes on social media and the minute to minute living. And
it's hard. It's hard. But I think it's bearing in mind what we give our power to. When we're getting very tuned into our soul, we recognize loved ones on their side, and we recognize the part that is infinitely connected to so much more than we think we are. I once had someone tell me the most powerful message where they said, "Why are you doubting yourself?" And I go, "I don't know." What I give my response, she goes, "Do you not think that you're a part of God?" I said, "That's very powerful." So to doubt yourself would be to doubt God, to doubt that, undeniable part of yourself. And one thing I've learned within the other side is a lot of people don't feel that they connect because of self-esteem issues. They feel that, that's for someone else who's, on a pedestal, but for me, I'm not worthy of it. I don't have it inside of myself. And so I think the point of, let's say, the life of Christ was not to put that on a pedestal, but to recognize that that is a potential within ourselves, and that is an undeniable part of ourselves. And so I think it's reframing what we've been taught we are with being able to observe with curiosity of who we truly are. And that might mean that might ruffle some feathers of people trying to control us or have a version of ourselves that they want us to be. And I think it's the decision of, do we want to satisfy that person's interpretations, or do we want to be authentic and expansive and to observe ourselves with curiosity and exploration? Because I think the self is forever evolving, and I look at it as curious as not close-ended. I think it's open-ended.
Yep.
So that makes sense.
Great message. Great message. Well, Jacob, it's been enlightening. I really wish you the best with all this moving forward. The world needs what you're offering, and so best wishes with it all for everybody that's going to be listening on the podcast or watching on the YouTube channel. You've been listening to Jacob Cooper, Master's in Social Work, licensed clinical social worker, author of Life After Breath, How I Brushed with Fatality Gave Me a Glimpse of Immortality. Check out his website, which we'll link to in the bio, so you can learn all about his seminars and meditation and mindfulness for both individuals and groups. Jacob, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to do this. Thank you for everything you're doing. And as we say on the show, thank you for helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us through your work. It's very inspiring.
I couldn't thank you enough for having me on, Ira. A true honor, and thank you for your work, and thank you, viewers, for taking your time out. And I hope some of this inspired and resonated and made your day a little bit more manageable. So an honor. Thank you.